Welcome back to the Sonic Truth Dynasty-focused fantasy football podcast. I'm Alan Seslowsky of RotoWire.com, moderator of the Sonic Truth podcast, along with Theo Gremminger and the Podfather. Theo, Podfather, I think that there's not a sensible person in the world that wouldn't say that CJ Stroud versus Bryce Young, it's over, right? It's over. But here's my question for you. Here's how I'm going to frame this. It's really just the orders of magnitude. Is this Sam Bowie and Michael Jordan? Is this Greg Oden and Kevin Durant? Like, how big is the orders of magnitude of this disaster at this point?
I tweeted this out in week 4 that I said this is an all-time miss, and I got attacked by most people. Thought it was smart. I said it's an all-time miss. I said that this is CJ Stroud over Bryce Young is going to go down as an all-time miss, and I said Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud are so far ahead of Bryce Young right now, it's not even funny. And I got attacked by Levis didn't even exist at this point, but that's another conversation to have. Yeah. But I got attacked by Alabama Twitter, and I got attacked by Carolina Panthers Twitter. The argument that it's receiver based, that he doesn't have the players that CJ Stroud has to work with. CJ Stroud has had career highs from Dalton Schultz had career highs in catches with him, career highs in yardage with him.
You're making Brown the other day. The case doesn't need to be made. It doesn't need to be made.
Bryce Young doesn't exist. Bryce Young is a low-end QB2 in Superflex Dynasty. He's insulated only because he's number 1 pick. He looks small. He's not a good quarterback. This guy right now is so far behind. It's not even funny. It's an all-time miss. Matt, It is an all-time miss.
Podfather, I just really the question I'm asking you, is this Sam Bowie and Michael Jordan? Is it that big of a chasm at this point?
This is such an embarrassing trade in retrospect. Go back and look at what the Bears got from Carolina for that first overall pick. Okay. And even if Carolina had selected CJ Stroud, just based on the valuation, the average output of what you're getting from the first overall pick, it was an overpay. But at least if it was CJ Stroud, we could look back in hindsight and say, this is understandable. This is what you have to do. A Godfather offer is what it takes. The Bears received Carolina's first-round pick in 2023, which was the 9th overall pick, okay? So it wasn't like they had the 29th overall pick and they had to trade all the way up, right? As it turns out, had Carolina just stayed where they were and Bryce Young fell to them at 9, which he wouldn't have, but let's say he did, he would still be a bust. It would have still been a bad pick. But no. It's so much worse. It's so much worse because Carolina gave the Bears the 9th overall pick, which became an offensive lineman, which could ultimately help Chicago more than Bryce Young will ever help Carolina. A late second-round pick in 2023, number 61 overall, a very valuable pick. A 2024 first rounder, which is going to be top 5 in a better draft class. And these are the picks that just really, these are the ones that burn me. These are the ones that I just am intellectually furious about, right? Because it's insulting to the human intellect that you would think that giving up a 2025 second rounder is necessary at all, but yet they do it anyway. Like, it's such a hoodwinking move to say, yeah, also we almost have a deal, but why don't you also give me your 2025 second rounder and DJ Moore? So why don't we starve this quarterback that you're about to draft 1 overall of an alpha wide receiver?
Theo.
So it was one of the worst trades in the history of sports.
Yeah.
So calling Bryce Young Sam Bowie at this point is a compliment. It's actually it's too friendly of a comparison. And there's no comparison. Okay, so it was a catastrophic overpay, and then it was a bust pick from a catastrophic overpay. And on top of all that, you have the regret of the guy that went with the very next pick looks generational.
And
So
I'll say this.
everything comes to, it was a confluence of circumstances to make this one of, if not the worst trade in the history of sports.
I'll say this. Matt, you bring up, and Alan, you bring up like the CJ Stroud versus Bryce Young comparison. You also throw into the mix, they took him over Anthony Richardson, which a year from now, even now, looks like a horrible mistake.
Oh.
But then, guys, you conflate it, Matt, with you bring up the better draft class. So from here on to eternity, Bryce Young is going to be compared to not only CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, but he's going to be compared to Caleb Williams and Drake May. And JJ McCarthy, by the end of this draft, the end of the college football season, is going to be a top 10 pick as well. So Carolina is going to have, and then Alan brings up Will Levis. At this moment, Alan, you're taking Will Levis over Bryce Young,
yes,
aren't you? Like,
yes.
100%.
Yeah, real football, fantasy football. So this is a perfect transition into what I was going to ask you guys about, something that applies now to fantasy football. People are already starting to formulate 2024 startup opinions, right? Like, a couple questions here. Like, how far, like, what pick does CJ Stroud go in a super flex draft? Not a rookie draft, not like a real startup draft. I was thinking, like, I wouldn't let him get past pick 6. And that might even be too low on him. I might not get him at pick 6 in a superflex startup, guys.
So the debate we're having right now at Player Profiler, the meeting of the minds, it's the Player Profiler computer, the supercomputer, the algorithm, right? So you've got the Player Profiler supercomputer weighing in, Dario Offstein, head of analytics, weighing in, Evan Ringler, Dynasty savant, analytics analyst, Dario right-hand man, weighing in. You have Theo Gremminger, one of the best Dynasty players in the world, weighing in. And you have me, whatever I am, weighing in.
Greatest human in the world.
Well, just very smart at fantasy
man
stuff. Fantasy data guy. The debate is CJ Stroud versus Justin Herbert versus Joe Burrow.
There you go.
You're right there.
That is now the conversation, right? That is the conversation. That's the tier he's in. He has surpassed Trevor Lawrence. Of course you want him over Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence couldn't do anything close to this as a rookie. And CJ Stroud's been better than him, even though now Trevor Lawrence has better weapons and has all this experience. And when you look back, oh, wait, actually, CJ Stroud was just as good, if not better, in college than Trevor Lawrence. And it should have been viewed as the clear-cut 101, the can't-miss 101, just like Trevor Lawrence was. Why CJ Stroud wasn't viewed as the next Trevor Lawrence, the next Justin Herbert, the next Joe Burrow, I don't know. But we talked about it. We talked about him looking like Joe Burrow and Aaron Rodgers. Those were the two quarterbacks that CJ Stroud reminded me of, and he's done nothing other than deliver on that beyond any of our wildest expectations. And if I'm sitting at the 105 in a Superflex startup, I'm going to push the button on Joe Burrow. I'm going to do it. Right? I'm going to do it. If not Lamar Jackson, right? It's going to be Lamar Jackson's in that tier too, right? So I'm assuming Lamar Jackson's gone. I'm probably going to push the button on Burrow. Someone goes Burrow, I'll go Lamar Jackson for now. But when it gets to 106 and it's between Herbert and CJ Stroud, and CJ Stroud is 3.5 years younger and is having a better rookie year than Justin Herbert's rookie year, and CJ Stroud was a much better college quarterback than Justin Herbert was. Explain to me why I go Herbert over Stroud.
Personal preference at this point. That's it. I mean, honestly, it's a personal preference thing, Matt, because it's a tier right now. And I'll say this, like, we still have half of a season to go. And the only thing that you're going to see from CJ Stroud is him gaining or passing these guys. I think, like, by the end of the day, Lamar Jackson's insulated at QB4 because he's kind of like close to that God tier, the rushing ability, the MVP season. But then when you get to quarterback 5, it's Stroud, Burrow, Herbert, and Matt, it's personal preference. And I hate saying that, we don't need to flag pimp, but I think when you get to the summer, You're going to have all three of those guys in their own mini tier. The very safe, big-time pocket passer with some mobility that has shown the ability to elevate his receivers. They're just incredible players, all three of them. But CJ Stroud has the most upside in the three. He's by far the youngest, and a half a season to gain on those guys. So
you know what?
I love it.
You know what? I think that all of those quarterbacks that you guys just named, I think that's the tier, whether you break them into an elite tier, a god tier, and a second, god tier, is those are all the quarterbacks that should go before the wide receivers start to go. I think now that we get into like the Trevor Lawrence area, now we could have that discussion about like Chase, Jefferson, Amon-Ra, CD, So we're always looking to where the wide receiver break is. I think we just defined it right there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's the conversation, right? You're going quarterback from pick 1 through pick 7 in a superflex startup. If you're going anything other than quarterback, you're doing it wrong. Then we have a conversation. Once it's Trevor Lawrence versus Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, that's a conversation.
Right. Yeah, it's all about how you want to build your roster at that point. But yeah, 1 through 7, I love that. Listen, this just kind of came out of a discussion right here, but I think this is a really good piece of actionable takeaway, guys. I mean, let's just talk about like the 2023 class in general, though. Like, is this class good? Is this class not good? I would like to do a very lightning quick exercise where we redraft the 2023 rookies at some point, guys, where, just knowing what we know now, all hindsight stuff.
No,
I'm not doing it.
I'm not doing it. I refuse, Alan. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this exercise. You want to know why? I'm not making a single pick. You want to know why? I'm trading all these picks. I don't want this class has been the underreported disaster of Dynasty. Right? Wake up, people. Wake up. Bijan Robinson has been a disappointment. Jahmyr Gibbs has delivered a couple weeks. Right? A lot of these sleepers are still asleep in Dynasty. It's being carried. This draft class is being carried by tight ends and CJ Stroud. That's it. And so if a class is being carried by one quarterback and a bunch of tight ends, I couldn't be less interested. It's not possible. It's not possible. And you can certainly point to certain players that are having good seasons. And hey, what about player X? Hey, Jordan Addison's actually delivering. Yeah, Jordan Addison's delivering in a world where Justin Jefferson was out. Sure, it seems that every wide receiver who profiles as a beta receiver in the league, right? Whenever you go down the board, we go down the board of all these receivers that were coming out in 2023, and what were we saying to every single one of these guys? Hey, his ceiling, best case scenario, this is the next Devontae Smith. No, he's the next Devontae Smith. No, he's the next Devontae Smith. You know who reminds me of Devontae Smith? Josh Downs. You know who reminds me of Devontae Smith? Zay Flowers. Actually, you know who's Devontae Smith? It's Jordan Addison, right? But guess what? There were no alphas in this class. And which team was the most suckered by that? Because there's always a team. There's two teams, and I think we can now agree that there's one team that has the worst front office in the league. The worst front office in the league is the Carolina Panthers. Okay?
Leading.
Carolina Panthers are the worst. I mean, you just traded everybody. What did it cost? Everything. To get what? A 5'9" game manager? You traded everything for a 5'9" game manager quarterback? What are you doing?
Matt,
what are you doing? And this was the criticism that we had from the beginning. CJ Stroud, 85 touchdowns, 12 interceptions the last 2 seasons. He's not a system quarterback any more than Pat Mahomes was a system quarterback at Texas Tech. That's why Patrick Mahomes wasn't the first overall pick, because they threw that ultimate insult at him. He was a system quarterback. He was drafted so high, or he was so prolific because of Texas Tech. And CJ Stroud was so prolific and good because of the coaches at Ohio State and the system and the wide receivers. It wasn't his ability. And it's like, well, okay, no, my operating assumption is that a player is his production, And then, you have to really come with a strong argument that, no, that's actually not true, right? Hendon Hooker was a much better argument. This was a system quarterback than C.J. Stroud.
Forgot about him.
And then we look back, and what do we actually have in this class? We have a bunch of guys that are maybe Devontae Smith, maybe. But none of them are actually Devontae Smith, because Devontae Smith won the Heisman. But what is Devontae Smith in the NFL? He's a high-end beta. When you look up, anyone that drafted Devontae Smith isn't actually happy about it. Devontae Smith's giving you the bare minimum of what you'd expect from a late second, early third round wide receiver. Most people believe, you poll any fantasy gamer, most people say, hey, Devontae Smith is a disappointment this year.
Big time.
Okay? And that goes right along with, aligns perfectly with this draft class, because this draft class was just a bunch of wannabe Devontae Smiths, right? You had Zay Flowers starting hot and fading. He's a wilting flower at this point. You have Puka Nacua, same thing, thriving when there's no target competition. And then when the target competition returns, suddenly, okay, he looks more and more like a late 5th round pick. And we just go down the board. Oh, the hope that is Rashee Rice, if he just gets more snaps, if he could just get more snaps. Oh, Josh Downs is producing, and now he is out with a knee injury. And then it's just, oh, look at Devon A-Chain's prolific. This guy's epic. He's out, right? So the moment a player exceeds expectations, there's a vaudevillian cane that just pulls him off the stage. And then you just get the guys that have just been consistently week in, week out, like Bijan Robinson, missing expectations and disappointing. And then we look up, and what do we got? A couple tight ends, and we got a quarterback. Yippee!
You've had, so, you bring up the wide receivers, I'll give you that, Matt. But I will say that the running backs, like Bijan, is still going to be a top 2. He's still going to be a top 2 startup at the running back position, no matter what happens. And then Gibbs and A-Chain are both going to be top 5. They're both going to be top 5 running backs in startups. You've had a RB1 overall week from Gibbs, like last week.
Oh, no! Oh, an RB1 week?
An RB1 overall.
Wow, he did really good. And we had A-Chain. We had that 1 week from A-Chain too, didn't we?
We had.
Wow, we did. We've had weeks.
And
we had a week from Tank Dell. We had a week. You can't take that away from us.
We had 3 weeks, 320+ point weeks for Tank
How about
Dell.
no weeks from Jackson Smith and Jigba? How about no weeks from Quentin Johnston?
Deal. Quentin Johnston bust. That one for sure. But I think
by the way, just so we can set this up for anyone that has not tuned into the show before, just so we can have this on wax for the record, for the internet, forever. Who was the bust quarterback identified by me from the beginning? The guy that was getting drafted because he aced a test that has proven to predict nothing.
Matt, the haters, you got to brush them off your shoulders, because you gave them the bust wide receiver and the bust quarterback, but you're not going to hear that. You'll hear about some Podfather take that you made like 3 years ago that was incorrect, and not
So the two biggest busts from the first round, per the Podfather, many months ago.
Yeah,
Bryce Young and Quentin Johnston. And where are we? Right, we're in week 10, and it is catastrophic. Unfortunately, they are more the norm than the outliers from this class. So there's a lot of other busts on this bus with these two guys.
Yeah, I'd like to go back.
But the NFL told us. The NFL told us. They said, "Hey, there isn't a top 15 wide receiver in this class. I know you want Jackson Smith and Jigba to be that, but he's a slot receiver in the league, and he actually doesn't have the ceiling that you fantasy people think he does." And so when you look back, there were 4 wide receivers drafted the previous year in 2022 before any of the 2023 receivers were drafted. Wouldn't it be nice to have a London or an Olave or a Garrett Wilson in the 2023 class? But we didn't have that kind of talent in that 2023 class. We were all going to the Senior Bowl trying to find seniors, right, with our binoculars, squinting to see if we could see how Jaden Reed can become a thing, and now it's becoming apparent
Rice,
it's not going to become a thing. We're just squinting at all these guys, and the receiver that was squinted on the most at the Senior Bowl was Jonathan Mingo. Jonathan Mingo, because he was the alpha trap. What happens is there's going to be draft classes that are devoid of talent at particular positions. It could be right tackle, right? It could be some position, right? Strong safety. There are some drafts where there's nobody, right? There was nobody at X receiver available except Michael Wilson, who was hurt his entire college career. So there wasn't enough tape for some NFL scouts to even do a proper evaluation of Michael Wilson. Okay.
All right.
So you have Michael Wilson and no other quality X receivers. In that void, NFL teams can't help themselves. If they feel like they need an X receiver, they're just going to draft the best one on their board, even though he's really a 4th-round talent. But if he's the best of what's available, NFL teams cannot help themselves. And they're going to draft a Mingo. They're going to draft a Quentin Johnston because they need that body type, just like New England the year prior needed a stretch player. And they're like, well, it's got to be Tyquan Thornton over George Pickens. It's not because they actually thought George Pickens was a better receiver. It's like, we need this position to run our offense. We are lacking this particular skill set. We're going out into the draft way too early, but this is what NFL teams do because we're just shopping for this particular skill set, this very narrow definition of what we need. We need a Z receiver with sub 4.4 speed. We're down to Tyquan Thornton. And the mistake that fantasy gamers make year in, year out is they then overrate that decision as draft capital and put all this weight on the draft capital of Quentin Johnston and Jonathan Mingo, where it was just a team filling a need in a class that was devoid of that particular guy. And so that's why whenever anyone's creating a model, my first recommendation is always, if you're assessing prospects, wherever the market is assessing draft capital, discount that 50%.
You've also got your Mingo point also, Matt, conflates the bad front office of Carolina because like the whole crutch of Bryce Young needs receivers. We can name Allen. You could name like 7 guys that have been taken after Mingo that would have given him a much better chance this year. It's that also like they took Mingo as the fifth overall pick, 5th overall wide receiver selected in this draft class.
You know what? It's similar to like when you're in a dynasty draft and you're just like, oh man, I need a running back, so I'm going to take a running back, and there's still better position wide receivers on the board. It's trying to fill that need, check off that box on what your actual team needs versus taking the best talent. But guys, let's pause the conversation here. We're going to take a quick break from people supporting the show, from our sponsors. And then when we come back, I want to change the conversation over to some of the veteran quarterbacks that have a little bit of uncertainty. And if those guys are players we should be trading for at our Dynasty League trade deadlines.
This episode brought to you by Mojo. Mojo is that player stock market. We love Mojo because we like making lifetime bets on players. You run out the clock on these guys. Mojo just rolled out a brand new fantasy platform. That's right. So now you can build a portfolio of player props. Oh, Jamar Chase, over 77.5. Oh, Kadarius Toney, under 15.5. Whatever the under is on Kadarius Toney, doesn't matter. You can just stack up the props in your portfolio. And the beauty is, once the Sunday games kick off, it's not over. It's not over until it's over with Mojo, because once those games kick off, you can then move in and out of positions. Let's say that you're well ahead of expectations. You can cash out. Let's say you're behind expectations. You're underwater. Well, you can double down. That's what makes Mojo so special, why they're different. Check it out. Go to the App Store, get the Mojo app, and use the promo code UNDERWORLD. The promo code UNDERWORLD gets you a 100% deposit match up to $100. So the promo code is UNDERWORLD, and they will match your deposit dollar for dollar. Go to Mojo, start building your portfolio, and then during the games, you can be a fantasy day trader. Ooh. Ooh.
Reset, guys. I'm Alan Seslowsky of RotoWire.com, moderator of the Sonic Truth podcast here with Theo Gremminger and the Podfather. Today, we're going to talk about trade deadline deals. Hopefully, your Dynasty League doesn't have a trade deadline coming up right here, but some do, and then some go right up to the playoffs. So, just larger conversation, guys. Should Dynasty Leagues have trade deadlines? Sometimes I fall on the side of, once the playoffs start, only let playoff teams trade with each other, let non-playoff teams trade with each other. I mean, there's no right or wrong. There's just an opinion. So let's just get a broader view before we start discussing some of the trades that we've seen and maybe evaluate.
Before we do that, I want to say Mojo is the best new fantasy app that's out there. One of the reasons why I'm so confident in promoting them and so enthusiastic about it is because it just is very, very cool. The ability to move in and out of positions during the game. So anyone that is signing up for Mojo this weekend using promo code Underworld, email me, podfather@rotounderworld.com, podfather@rotounderworld.com. If you sign up for Mojo, I will give you a premium Player Profiler membership, the all-in package, a free all-in package for the rest of the season. The first 3 people to email me will get that. Use promo code Underworld with Mojo, and then email me, podfather@rotounderworld.com. I do have trade deadlines. I believe in trade deadlines. There's no reason to allow people to be trading from Thanksgiving through New Year's, right? You're
Dynasty.
trading all year, right? There's just 1 month or a little over a month where you're not trading because you're out of contention. Go sit in the corner. You're out of it. And let the grown-ups that are trying to win compete without some, like balloon coming down, like a parachute coming down from the Hunger Games dome at the very last minute to unfairly help a guy who, just happens to be friends with everybody in the league in the semifinals. It's just not right. It doesn't feel right. Even when you do it, you feel dirty doing it. So why do it? Both sides hate themselves while they're doing it. So don't allow them to do it. Just have a trade deadline, and that's it.
I'm pro trade deadline as well. I think that when FFPC does it is about right, which is in about 20 days. They have it at finishes. It's a Sunday, so you can trade right up into to that week's games. But like Matt said, you have to have a little bit of control. The ones who have no trade deadline, especially during the playoffs, it's super weird. And then when you get those crazy trades like the week before the playoffs start, you get weird league imbalances. It's just not it's chaos, Matt. It's anarchy, and we can't have it. You got to have some sort of control. So, Alan, I think December seems like a time people shouldn't be making dynasty trades. That's about right. That makes sense to me.
All right. Put in the chat if you believe there should be a trade deadline in your Dynasty League. And also put in the chat what your trade deadline is. Week what? What are some of the weird parameters or rules about it? We want to know and share that with everybody. We very interested. This is a topic where
do you not feel dirty, Alan, doing it? If you drop a Tyreek Hill on a semifinalist, do you not feel dirty? Do you not feel like this can't possibly be allowed, but I'm doing it, I guess?
Trade deadline for me is always 1 week, is the second to last week of the regular season. That has shifted when we got one extra game. That's how I've always done it, but I'm open to scrutiny. So to answer your question, yes, I would not like that. I would not be happy if it was happening against me. So there it is. Guys, some of the players, I want to talk about some of the quarterbacks. So there's been a quarterback injuries, and we always talk about on Dynasty shows buy low, sell high, but the real actionable advice, the true buy low is buying distressed assets, players that are injured. So it's time to talk about Daniel Jones, Kirk Cousins, Nick Chubb. If you're trying to buy low, who are the players that we want to buy low on that we think can have viability next year? And what does buy low actually mean as far as transactions? What type of players?
If I'm not in contention this year, Kirk Cousins is one that I would invest in, and I could keep him on the IR. and know that I have probably a starting quarterback next year. I think that Minnesota wants to go back to Cousins. The team's wearing Kirk Cousins t-shirts on the sideline. He's leading the NFL in passing touchdowns. He's going to want to be a Viking. That's like, it's team context, Alan, because you can't really take on Kirk Cousins, unless you're basically a rebuild team or a team with incredible QB depth. But
Did
if
you hear
can
what you
make
just
that sort
said,
of trade,
by the way?
Yeah.
Who would ever thought that Kirk Cousins is part of a rebuild?
Well, technically, it would be you'd have to, like, a rebuild. We could get into this more in the offseason, but even a rebuild these days, like, you're going to get yourself in contention in 2 years. We're not advocating for some, like, 4-year rebuild.
No.
That usually doesn't work. So it's rebuilds happen sooner than later. And Alan, having a Kirk Cousins, when we enter the season next year, he'll end up being a top 15 quarterback in redraft. So he'll have trade value, and you can move him if you're not ready to go. If you think you're ready to go, you have a built-in QB2 with QB1 upside. Kirk Cousins is exactly the type of guy we want to advocate people to go get. The guys that are dangerous, though, Alan.
Whoa, wait.
Are,
Kirk
Go ahead.
Cousins is going to be 35 at the start of next season, right? 35 years old. So even if you don't think you can compete next year, you better be preparing your team to compete the following year. 2025, right?
Yeah.
That is the latest you would accept your team being competitive. And if you're trying to plan for 2026 and 2027, you're doing it wrong, you're doomed to fail, right?
Yeah.
So let's just think about Kirk Cousins in that situation, okay? In 2025, that's Kirk Cousins' age 36 season. And quarterbacks play till age 40. Someone like Kirk Cousins can absolutely play out to age 40. He's had very few injuries in his career. So we're talking about his age 36, 37, and 38 season. So this is the most unlikely rebuild quarterback of my lifetime.
But it makes
But
sense.
actually, given the situation that he has Justin Jefferson, that he has job security, that he has this 3-year window where quarterbacks are still productive, right? Yes, age 39, 40, you start to see a Ben Roethlisberger and Aaron Rodgers decline. But Aaron Rodgers and Ben Roethlisberger had a litany of lower body injuries for Aaron Rodgers. Like Aaron Rodgers having a bad ankle or a bad Achilles or a bad knee or a hamstring is not a surprise. There were many years where Aaron Rodgers could not finish the season, where he was missing 3 or 4 games with some sort of, serious hamstring injury, something. Aaron Rodgers has missed a lot more games with injury than most people think. Same thing with Ben Roethlisberger. His entire arm was falling off. He had a reconstructed elbow, a reconstructed shoulder, okay? And yet still, was leading the league in pass attempts in 2018, right? Kirk Cousins has been a picture of health. He's been 16, 17 games a season every single year. You're going to look up, and age 39 Kirk Cousins is going to be a productive NFL quarterback. So you could absolutely rebuild around him in Superflex.
Yeah. How about Daniel Jones, J.K. Dobbins? I'm just throwing names out there because these are the players that are gettable right now if you think that they're going to be viable in 2024, guys.
I personally don't want to go out and get Daniel Jones. I have a lot of concerns about his long-term viability. I think that New York's going to move on at the quarterback position, and then we start getting to hoping he lands in a Baker Mayfield-like situation. A lot of times, guys, for every Baker Mayfield, you get Jameis Winston types that just never become the starter. So
Theo, second round pick, random in 2024 for Daniel Jones. You wouldn't take him on if you're really worried about your superflex quarterback depth. Like I'm talking about, this is the dollar bin pricing right now.
Maybe I'm making that trade, but I'm not feeling great about it, and I'd have to be in bad quarterback shape. Because you
can get it done. You can get it done.
Yeah,
I'm
Dobbins
not interested in that trade,
too.
Alan.
Yeah.
That trade's not helping me, right? That trade is not helping me. I might have a lottery ticket for the second round that could hit. Like, there's no way Daniel Jones ever going to hit, right? He's just going to essentially hurt my ability to get a higher draft pick if my team is bad, and he's not going to help me win a championship. So what are you getting from Daniel Jones? Daniel Jones should be radioactive. He's not helping you. He's not good. Okay? He needs the perfect conditions to be successful. He needs that extra second from the offensive line. He needs quality receivers. He doesn't have any of that, and he's only getting older, rushing less. Everything is trending in the wrong direction with a guy like Daniel Jones. And there's other quarterbacks that I'm not necessarily interested in buying low on either. Russell Wilson. There's real long-term risk about his viability in the league. Suddenly, Geno Smith, with all these weapons, is not delivering. And he only had a decade of not delivering prior, right? When a quarterback finds himself getting that extra second from an offensive line that is coalescing and happens to be, facing some softer secondaries, you can put together a whole season of efficient production and fool almost everybody into thinking you're back or you were what was promised 10 years ago, when it's never going to happen for Daniel Jones. He was always a reach by Dave Gettleman. It was a bust pick then. It's a bust pick now. One solid, good fantasy year is not going to change that for Geno Smith. It's not going to change that for Daniel Jones. Russell Wilson is an interesting case, and there's a little more nuance in that the problem is his coach is not fireable. So now someone has to fall on the sword in Denver, and it's almost always the coach. But Denver just traded a first-round pick for that coach. And this coach is appearing in commercials, right? So this is a coach with a brand. It's a coach that they just forfeited a first-round pick to get. And so it's a tricky situation. It's much trickier than it would appear on the surface with Russell Wilson. And I think he's less secure, much less secure. I mean, Kirk Cousins is worlds more secure longer term for the next 3 years in his role as a starting NFL quarterback than Russell Wilson. So most of these quarterbacks I'm terrified by. I'd rather just go all the way down the board and trade for a Josh Dobbs, who has a great chance to be a starter next year, has been exceeding all expectations, has the mobility, doesn't have the brand name that you have to overpay for in Superflex.
And I'll throw it out there, as gross as it sounds, Baker Mayfield might be earning himself a second year in a row as starting quarterback in Tampa. He's performing well. He's performing well. You're talking about a 28-year-old, which is so weird when you think about like Baker Mayfield only being 28. It feels like we've been talking about him for like 15 years, but he's 28 years old. And he's doing well in Tampa. Just was in a shootout against CJ Stroud where he played well, and they're going to price themselves out of the big quarterbacks in this draft class. They might win their division. So Baker Mayfield's one I would look at. I would also kick the tires, guys, instead of going like, hoping these guys stick around like a Daniel Jones. I would kick the tires on Sam Howell, because I don't think people know how to properly price him in Dynasty. We have him.
Whoa, what do you mean? What do you mean? Kick the tires. This guy's been prolific. This guy's putting up 300 yards a game.
Yeah.
This guy's a tactical scrambler. He's giving you some rushing production. Most people are now in on Sam Howell as the quarterback in Washington in 2024, including Washington's front office, Washington's coaching staff.
I think
you're not kicking the tires on Sam Howell. Sam Howell is officially established. I think that Sam Howell is harder to get than you think.
Yeah.
Have you seen someone trading for Sam Howell at a reasonable price recently?
Only before the season. Not
no,
now.
Man.
Yeah.
No, the guy Sam Howell is what we wanted Kenny Pickett to be.
Exactly.
But I think that's the name. If you were trying to kick the tires on a guy who's down and out, right? Who's like, when you say kick the tires, I envision a car that doesn't work. Right? A car that's parked with flat tires and rust. But man, if we could kick the tires on this thing and get it reinflated, and someone could work on the engine, this thing could really become something. We could start this thing up, and it could be a roadster. This would be interesting. Kenny Pickett is that guy. It's not over for Kenny Pickett.
Kenny Pickett is a guy that's difficult to invest in my opinion, because we just haven't seen anything from him.
It's impossible. But that's what you're talking about. When you talk about guys that the market is having a difficult time, that's the guy.
The markets has a difficult time with Sam Howell, though, guys. Like, we can bring redraft over to this. Even 2 weeks ago, Matt, you could get Sam Howell on waiver wires in a lot of leagues. The Dynasty marketplace has not fully moved on to Sam Howell.
Single quarterback.
Single quarterback, yeah. But in
Superflex, Jordan Love is valuable, you know?
In Superflex right now, there is a disconnect from where we have Sam Howell ranked in our Dynasty rankings versus his trade value and his trade equity. People talk about, and Matt, the 5th round pick thing still matters to people. People don't have that level of safety with Sam Howell that they do some of these other quarterbacks. I think he's exactly the kind of guy that I would go out and shoot for trade offers. Where we have him in Dynasty is more accurate of like his actual value than what I think you'd have to pay. And I think you could go get Sam Howell in a Superflex league more easily than you would think for a guy putting up 5 QB1 overall weeks at age 23 years old. Like, Sam Howell could turn out to be the Superflex cheat code for a guy you're going to go out and trade for.
You're preaching to the choir. I know that. I just think that you're not giving league mates around the world enough credit. The bottom line is Kenny Pickett was a first-round pick. There's not a possibility, especially now that the Steelers are winning games, there's not a possibility that they go out and they replace him in the draft. It's not possible. I mean, if the team was tanking, right? If his bad play was actually translating into a stacking of losses, then there could be an argument. Oh, they're going to replace him in the draft, but they're 5-3.
Yeah, no,
they're 5-3. And when you talk to people in Pittsburgh that are not in fantasy football, they think that Kenny Pickett's doing okay. Right? They actually like, well, what's wrong with Kenny Pickett? We're 5-3. It's like, well, but his fantasy points per game is like, wait, I don't care about fantasy. So he's fine. He's insulated, right? This very much reminds me of the Daniel Jones situation when he was heading into year 3. And it was like, they're going to move on from Daniel Jones. This is the albatross around Dave Gettleman. But the draft capital and the investment, and then seeing the incremental improvements inside the organization that we don't see, leads a team to continuing to build around that particular quarterback, even though the rest of us from the outside are looking and going, you guys are in QB purgatory. You need to pull the ripcord on Daniel Jones, but they don't. And now they're so many years into this Daniel Jones experiment, and they're finally realizing, wait, we should have moved on all along. And this is what's going to happen in Pittsburgh. Should they move on from Kenny Pickett? Yes. Will they? No. And I think that's the reason why you invest in him, because the offensive line's only getting better. They continue to invest in developmental, like high upside, high ceiling tackles in the draft. Eventually, he's going to get that extra second to throw. He has the weapons in Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth. Pat Freiermuth's not dead. So eventually we're going to look up and go, oh, wow, Kenneth Pickett. Kenneth Pickett Sr. gave us that one Daniel Jones season that we were hoping for. Could be next year, could be the year after, but you should not be selling low on Kenny Pickett. Do not do it.
Yeah, I think everybody knows at this point that the move was to give Saquon Barkley the contract and franchise tag Daniel Jones, right? I mean, it was obvious then. It's obvious now. I just wonder when the day is, because if it's so obvious to fantasy players, why is it never obvious to these GMs? I mean, the Bears trading the 2nd round pick for Montez Sweat, which is going to be a top 5 2nd round pick. Like, wait for the guy to get into free agency. When they traded a 2nd round pick, which actually was a 1st round pick because it was pick 32 for Chase Claypool. Anyone in plays fantasy football knew this was horrible. And I don't want to deviate from that too much, but we're talking about some trade deadline deals, guys. Kyler Murray is very interesting this week, right? Like, he's coming back I think we all know that they want to show that he's healthy in case they do want to trade him. I'm not saying it's for certain. So let's say he comes in and has 3 or 4 good games. Do you think they put him back on the shelf? Because if he's injured by the start of the league year next year, March 5th or whatever it is, they have to fully guarantee him another year on his contract. So he needs to be healthy and pass a physical on March 5th. And also prove that he could play football at a high level so they can get a return or keep him, Theo?
I think if you were trying to keep Kyler Murray on ice and you were keeping him just to trade him, I don't think you would need to bring him back to show that he's okay. I think that you would have just held on to Dobbs, who they didn't get anything for. So it's not like they traded Dobbs for any kind of amount. I think that's kind of like overthinking. I think you're going to see Kyler Murray for the rest of the season. I think they wouldn't bring him back if it was like, hey, let's play him for 4 weeks and then we're going to reshelve him. I think that's just overthinking it a little too much when it comes to the Cardinals. I think the ideal outcome for the Cardinals is that Kyler Murray comes back and looks like Kyler Murray, and they've got their quarterback, and they're building with Kyler Murray and a bunch of draft picks and a more of a competent, well-run coaching staff. I think that's the ideal scenario for Arizona is they already have their quarterback that they don't need to pivot and they don't need to trade this guy.
They have pick 2 and pick 15 if the draft was today, guys, right? So that's a viable strategy too. But let's say, Drake May has been moving up boards, being even talked about as like the number 1 overall pick. If the draft was today, they would have their choice of whoever falls to them between Marvin Harrison, which would be what Theo just said, build around Murray, or to reset the clock because there'll be a market for Kyler Murray.
I think that there's a possibility they trade down a little bit end up with Marvin Harrison Jr. or Brock Bowers or some elite pass-catching weapon. And it's also we'll get into this a lot in the offseason. We're going to do some really cool rookie stuff here for this 2024 class. But this 24 class, like, it's the opposite of what Matt talked about, where there's a lot of like beta type, slightly smaller receivers in our current rookie class. This upcoming class is all big alphas. There's going to be like 5 that go in the first round. There's multiple opportunities. Receivers.
Yeah.
Keon Coleman at Florida State. There's all these Rome Odunze at Washington. And not that Marvin Harrison Jr., who's transformative, like change the game type prospect at wide receiver. So you're going to see Arizona end up with one of these guys and an offensive lineman and build around Kyler Murray, I think is the ideal outcome.
What's the other guy? They call him.
Thank you, Matt.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, guys. Kyler Murray is going to be a Cardinal for a long time.
There you go.
Kyler Murray's staying put. Kyler Murray's not going anywhere. Move on. Justin Fields will be a Falcon. The Bears will be drafting Caleb Williams. And the Cardinals will be drafting a wide receiver. That's it.
That means the Giants, if it all holds to form, gets Drake May.
Drake May to the Giants.
Or QB2, whoever. What about that guy? What about 12-inch? The quarterback they call 12, Michael Penix?
So we like him. And listen, you guys, I highly recommend. And it's Alan. You got to go there.
You don't call him 12-inch, that guy? Is that his name?
So he's not going to go in the first round because of the injury history, but he's really good. Like, we'll talk about. He's good. He's good. The quarterback 3 is JJ McCarthy from Michigan. Matty Kiwoom and I decided that on a future cast. We're all about that JJ McCarthy.
All right, guys. Couple more quarterbacks that I think need to be discussed. So Kyler Murray, right back into our top 8 or 10. It sounds like, and he'll get better every week. I'm very curious to see that. You brought up Josh Dobbs. Is he going to be the starter for the Minnesota Vikings, given the nature and the timing of Kirk Cousins' injury? So I guess really for our dynasty leagues, what should he be being transacted for at the deadline if you need a quarterback? Because you get the rest of the season, and is there a chance that he actually starts the season as the Vikings QB1 in 24?
He has more upside than Daniel Jones. So that, if you're going to use a second-round pick, that's what I would be going for. I'd be going for a Josh Dobbs in Superflex, but you don't need. I think you can get him for a third rounder, can't you?
Used to, but now that he's the unquestioned starter on a good offense, I've only seen him transacted for a second plus now. So even a second is like the least. It used to be a third.
Right. It was a third. Now it's a second.
Yes.
And a second plus is fine too. I'm a believer.
Yeah.
These guys, they just need to put together a season. If they can put together a season, they're going to have value. There's going to be teams out there that need quarterback, and he's going to find himself starting 10 games next year. That's just what's going to happen. I don't know which team it's going to be with necessarily. I can't guarantee he's going to start the year with the Vikings and then they trade him to someone else. Then he's going to be a starter. I'm excited for Josh Dobbs. I think he's going to be one of these journeymen that goes around the league as a hired gun, just winning games and making millions of dollars. I think it's awesome. And it's great for fantasy because he's so mobile.
Has there ever been a quarterback like that, like a true mercenary that has weekly QB1 upside? I like in the last 10 years, I can't think of anybody offhand. I mean, whenever I think of journeyman, I always think of like Jameis Winston. I think of Andy Dalton, but
Tyrod Taylor.
There it is. There it is.
Right, but Tyrod Taylor is the closest. But Tyrod Taylor has the weakest arm in the league. Right. So Josh Dobbs actually he can throw the ball to the outside. He's got mobility.
It's magic.
He's got size. The best example is Fitzpatrick, right? Fitzmagic.
Yeah. He was the one that you were always excited for fantasy when he was on a team, right? So
this is the next Ryan Fitzpatrick. Oh my God, this is it. I love it. Who doesn't love that?
Fitzmagic.
Yep. So wait, hold on. One of you say it, so it's a real quote from the show. This way, it could be on the quote card.
Josh Dobbs is going to be a starter for years to come. He's the next Ryan Fitzpatrick.
That would have been it. Yeah,
gosh, if we did that at the end of the show, guys, that would have been the greatest ending. Matt, that would have been the greatest ending ever.
Because Tyler's in the chat. Our fearless producer Tyler Knable, he'll clip that up.
Yeah, that's a good take.
Tyler.
All right. Some other players we need to talk about that I think can be transacted in our Dynasty League trade deadline, guys. George Pickens. There's a lot of frustrations with him right now. So I'm going to frame it like this. In Dynasty Fantasy Football, which Pittsburgh wide receiver do you think is more valuable moving forward for the rest of their career? And is George Pickens a buy low? Because you can get him low right now versus what he was a month ago. Or is he someone that you just want to get your money back if you can?
Well, what are you offering for George Pickens?
But start with, you know what? I asked, that's a Radio 101 faux pas. I asked 2 questions in 1 question. Start with who's the more valuable Pittsburgh wide receiver for the rest of their careers? Who are you guys going to rank higher at Player Profiler in Dynasty?
Well, it's a 5-year age gap, and George Pickens is an alpha. For me personally, I would rather have, if I had a everything equal, and whether I'm a contender versus a rebuilder, I'm completely averse in that part of this situation. I am going to go with George Pickens. He's 22 years old. He's had 3 top 100 weeks. He's shown vast improvement from year 1 to year 2. He just happens to be playing in an offense and with a quarterback who cannot support 2 targets. And Deontay Johnson is a target magnet. But Deontay Johnson is older than him. He's 27 years old. So I have, conceivably 4 more years from Pickens, and everything said, I'm going to go with the youth equity. Now, if you get to a question and I'm a team that's going to make the playoffs this year, then I'd rather have Deontay Johnson because Deontay Johnson's a target magnet right now. So it's a nuanced question, Alan. But long term, I'm going to rank George Pickens higher in Dynasty, and I'd prefer to have him if it was like a startup.
George Pickens will eventually help people win leagues. He's that good. In fact, if he had just stayed in school, because what were the concerns about George Pickens? That he's too intense, right? That was a legit criticism from NFL scouts. Listen, we're worried about this guy in the locker room because he's too intense. Excuse me? I thought that you wanted guys with passion. Okay, so that's weird. And also the injury concerns, right? That he can't stay healthy. He only played, same reason why Michael Wilson fell to the 3rd round. George Pickens had a better talent profile, fell to the 2nd round. Had he just stayed in school, gone to the Senior Bowl and shredded, right? He would have been the best receiver in the class. He would have been the guy that the Chargers were drafting that needed a next receiver. Yes. So imagine he stays in school, ends up having the Chargers passing game to himself longer term with Justin Herbert. Instead, he's trapped in Pittsburgh with Kenneth Pickett and his gloves and Deontay Johnson on the other side, who's one of the target leaders of the last 5 years in the NFL. So if we could go back with sliding doors and change George Pickens' career choices, have him stay in school, he would have had a great time for one more year at Georgia, right? Oh, that sounds really, really boring. Going back to Georgia to win a championship. Like,
George
man.
Pickens, 2 touchdown catches against TCU, and in the Podfather's multiverse, he's catching touchdown passes from Justin Herbert right now.
That's the thing.
It's almost
because he
incredible.
would have fell to the
Yeah.
Chargers because he's a senior, right? So, oh God, yeah, he could coming out when he didn't end up being the right move. I could see why, though. At the beginning of the process, he was like, "Yeah, I'm the best receiver in this class." Or I'm right there with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Drake London. I'm going to be drafted top 15 just like them. And then, the fickle nature of NFL scouting pushes him down to the mid-second round, and even the Patriots passed on him. Even the Giants fans, you drafted Wan'Dale Robinson over George Pickens. George Pickens has a couple games this year with 10 targets, and in those games he had over 100 air yards, had almost 200 air yards in one of the games. So he has 2 wide receiver 1 performances, but then he also has 4 performances outside the top 50. That's the problem with George Pickens, is that the consistency has not been there. And actually the target share, 2 weeks with 5 targets, he didn't have that all of last year. So there's some concerns with George Pickens, like what's going on? But the guy, he was a 5-star recruit. We know that he has an incredible work ethic and passion for the sport, and that he has the highlight reel catches. I just can't believe that a guy with that raw material and that kind of future in the league is going to crash and burn. I can't see it. And for that reason, in Dynasty, I actually like the Devontae Smith archetype, right? Give me a bunch of Jordan Addisons in Dynasty. I'll be happy with that, right? I can get my edge with the other positions. I can just set it and forget it with a Jordan Addison. I actually like doing that, and so I have a lot more Deontay Johnson than the average Dynasty gamer for that reason. But the upside of George Pickens, he is just one of those characters that captivates my imagination, and it's a rare case where I'm going to shoot for upside and I'm going to go Pickens.
All right.
I think, Alan, you could trade for him in 2 different ways. It's the pivot down if I'm somewhat of a rebuild or a neutral with my team approach. I could pivot down from an older wide receiver who's outproducing him the last few weeks.
The Mike Evans, Keenan Allen type, you mean? Yeah.
And he goes from being a guy that a couple weeks ago I think people would have wanted a late first for. I think for the reasons Matt said, the target disparity with him and Deontay Johnson. I'm gonna throw out I'd throw out an early second and a third and see if somebody counters me back. And I think eventually he'll be worth he's worth 2 seconds right now in like an FFPC type league.
Yeah. He's caught in between. He's not really a guy that could be traded for picks. He has to be. Yeah. I like what you said. It's the older, productive now wide receiver. A team that has a third receiver that has Pickens as their third receiver, and they're going for it. And you're sitting there with the DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen,
Amari Cooper. If I have Amari Cooper and I know I'm not going to win the league this year, I'm going to offer him to the George Pickens manager and say, hey, do you want this guy who scored 20-something points back-to-back weeks, clear number 1 on their team, for your guy who's like Matt said, can't crack 5 targets the last 2 weeks. And I think that a lot of people are going to bite the bullet and make that deal.
I'm going to push you on this a little bit here. How about, would you just give Cooper Kupp straight up for him?
I'd want Pickens plus for Kupp.
I'm saying straight up. If that's the deal, you're declining it. If you're sitting there,
he's not doing it, Alan.
So
I'm going to decline that.
Cooper Kupp is Larry Fitzgerald. He's got many years to go. Don't worry. Don't worry about that, man. But if you are going to trade George Pickens, I would do it now. And if you're trying to trade for him, I would wait, because they're playing the Packers. Jair Alexander, it's a 39-point total. If he stacks yet another game with 5 targets and no production, he got a bailout touchdown a couple weeks ago. If we're talking 3 straight weeks where Deontay Johnson is the target leader and the clear go-to receiver, and George Pickens is suddenly flailing for 3 straight weeks, there's no reason to try to trade for him now heading into this matchup.
And George Pickens, get a foot down, man. Last week was ridiculous. Like, I got your back here on Sonic Truth, so does the Podfather. But when you have a clear touchdown, get a second foot down in the end zone. That one was about as bad as it gets.
Really, Theo?
Right.
Really?
Make us
You're
look
giving
good.
advice. You're giving on how to play the game to George Pickens. Really?
Get a foot down, George Pickens. Get a foot down.
I say that as someone who just absolutely ripped Dalton Schultz to shreds because he couldn't get positive yards. Right? So he also couldn't get his foot down. But that was back-to-back plays. My standard is if you do not look like an NFL receiver in back-to-back plays, then you open yourself up to criticism. But one play, dude?
Yeah.
He'll get. Trust me, George Pickens is he's gonna come back
All
and
right.
he's gonna regain your trust. I can promise you that, Theo.
So when we talk about
I love him.
He's a really good player.
Love him.
No
Guys,
one
when we
is gonna
talk
argue.
about-
This is the thing. It ultimately comes down to: is anyone in the chat gonna say George Pickens is bad at football? No, that's decided, right? And now we're talking about a world where what if Kenneth Pickett Sr. has more time to throw next year as this offensive line continues to develop?
I never heard him called Kenneth Pickett Sr. before, but I like it. Is there a junior? Does he have?
He has no children.
Okay, all right. So he's the future senior.
Matt's already deciding. Matt's.
Well, this is what I do
into
because basically when these guys have these like childlike nicknames like Kenny or Bobby, in order to give them more reverence, I say their full name. I take away the childhood nickname is out, and we go full name, and then we add a suffix as well. He could be the third. He could be a senior, but that's how I show reverence. And he's a leader. I'm telling you, there's no one in Pittsburgh that's like, yeah, man, we really got to move on from Kenny Pickett.
Hey,
Yeah.
Meanwhile, every fantasy gamer is like, God, he's awful.
Can I get us completely off topic on one thing that I'm actually shocked by right now, guys? We've made it over an hour into the show, and we haven't had Alan at one point reference Jerry Jones comparing winning a Super Bowl to a glory hole.
Oh, I
Not
forgot
one.
about that. Right.
Yeah.
Right. He doesn't know. That's just an old dude, not
All right.
Or me.
All right.
Or but. By the way, have you ever?
Wait,
had a
wait,
glory hole?
whoa. You think that Jerry Jones doesn't know what a glory hole is? That he just said it off because he thought it was a fun phrase to say?
Yeah, he doesn't know. Like he's no Robert Kraft. You know what I'm saying?
Robert Kraft definitely. Robert Kraft has a glory hole somewhere in his office.
Yeah. I mean, come on. I mean, shouldn't Robert Kraft and the Patriots trade for Deshaun Watson? Wouldn't that be like perfect? They can go together to the massage parlor. Those two. I mean,
Deshaun, I know all the best spots in town. I'd like to recommend a few places to you.
Totally. Yeah. By the way, glory hole. That's the one subcategory of porn I can't get into, and I'm into a lot of stuff there, but that one, man, it even creeps me out. I have to say, and I'm into almost anything.
It just looks uncomfortable.
Tyler, like your penis, you're gonna get a splinter putting it through the wall, whatever it is.
I think it's also a fake premise.
Right, because my penis wouldn't fit through the wall. It would be stuck where the studs are. I'm just telling you, it's But
I would need to bring an extra drill bit to widen the hole.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, I think
the
the glory hole should be like the anus, right? You should put your anus up to it, and then someone should put the tongue inside. This way, I don't know.
I knew you'd save this, Alan.
Don't.
I knew you would
Tyler.
say something interesting. I was like, are we going to really bring up this topic and no one will say anything interesting? And then, Alan, you did it, buddy.
Yeah,
You did it, Alan. You took it too far. You took it too far.
I think I'm turned on right now. I was just picturing it, so. Thinking maybe I am into glory holes. I had no idea.
I'm turned on butthole. Glory butthole.
Why? You never had your ass licked before? Have you ever done it to someone?
End the show, guys. End the show. Tyler, don't put this on a quote graphic.
Wait, let's ask the audience. I'll be honest. I'll ask the audience.
Nice. It's a nice thing to do.
Am I lame? The Podfather. Let us know in the chat. Am I lame that I have done neither. I have not been on the receiving end nor the giving end of a
anal cunnilingus.
wet butthole. I've just never done that in any way. I've not been on either side of the fence, of the equation. I haven't been there. I don't know. Am I lame? I've done some other cool stuff, but I haven't done that. And I don't know. Maybe this is like a weak spot in my sex resume.
Yeah, no, you got also, when you envision yourself, do you envision yourself on all fours getting that or on your back with your legs up like a woman?
Alan, Tyler, don't quote that. No quotes, Tyler.
Yeah.
Happy baby.
Shout out to Mojo, our sponsors.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Can I ask about Demario Douglas?
Yeah. Speaking of ass licking, right? No.
Yeah. I have a lot of players to talk about. Yeah. I want to ask Theo about Demario Douglas. Demario Douglas has been one of the most searched for players on Player Profiler for weeks. And he disappointed last week. Everyone thought, hey, this is the week. It's the Washington secondary. And then he and Juju put up the same stat line. And it was like 10 fantasy points. But this week, they get the Colts, who get absolutely demolished, shredded, destroyed by outside wide receivers. Juju is gonna occupy Kenny Moore on the inside. Kenny Moore is Kenny Moore. He's not Kenneth Moore Sr. And it's going to be all about Demario Douglas, Super Demario on the outside. Assuming he has a 15-plus fantasy points, isn't this like the quintessential insta-sell wide receiver that we look for every year? Isn't this the one we circle? It's before the trade deadline. It's an undrafted guy. It's the worst possible offense to have be relied upon for consistent fantasy production. It's two of the best secondaries to face. Everything is lining up. No Kendrick Bourne. Have you ever seen a better sell candidate? And do you think there's anyone that would be gullible enough to take him off your hands? Let's say he has a 20-point week.
I'm gullible enough. I would take him.
Yeah, I think I might like Douglas a little bit more than you do, Matt. I had him my number one waiver wire recommendation like 2 weeks ago. I still put him in the top 3 this week behind Keaton Mitchell. Like, he's had back-to-back weeks with 7 targets, and he also is able to operate in the slot. And the one reason I wouldn't be so quick to just brush him off is the manufactured rushing attempts. But yeah, Matt, if somebody wants to give you a second-round pick for him, if you can get a dynasty second for Demario Douglas, then yeah, I'm cashing in based on the available. Yeah. Basically, he sees an opportunity go way up because of the loss of Kendrick Bourne. And by definition, if you need Kendrick Bourne to get out of the way for you to be more fantasy viable, then you're probably a sell and not a hold. Right. But I do think Douglas is going to be in the league longer than we think. Yeah. The guy's good, and the beat reporters loved him all training camp. Like, he flashed and flashed and flashed. This wasn't a guy that like crept up on us. Small school guy from Liberty, but he's got real quickness and also the manufactured rushing attempts. But Matt, if you give me a second round pick for Demario Douglas, I'm going to take it. But I'm not going to. Of course,
you're taking it. Listen to yourself.
The second,
have you ever listened to yourself? We should put together a montage of all the Dynasty podcasts back through time that have talked themselves into undrafted wide receiver X that put up a few weeks. Do you know I have 2 football cards that sit in front of me that stare at me right under the camera? Did you guys know this? Let me show you.
We're getting in the lab with the Podfather.
I have 2 football cards, and this is my North Star, my guiding principles. Here we have a signed Jeff Janis card sent to me by a listener, so I treasure this. Okay. This was a guy with incredible workout metrics, a super dominant small school college receiver, and caught 2 consecutive Hail Marys, the first and last time that's ever going to be done, and then he was immediately flushed out of the league. Okay? What could have been? He could have been a Pro Bowl receiver had he landed on a different team with a different quarterback in different circumstances with a different coaching staff. There's no guarantees that any particular NFL player is going to become what they become. it's very much in God's hands, right? When you go out there and join the NFL, there's no guarantees, no matter how hard you work. And so I like to know that the ultimate uncertainty of what ends up happening to these players in Dynasty. Jeff Janis was drafted in the 6th round, I believe, and then we have another 6th round pick. His name is Travis Fulgham. Okay, Travis Fulgham. And Travis Fulgham was doing what Demario Douglas was doing with the Eagles for a period of time. And you could get a 2nd rounder for him. Okay?
There you go.
And it's time and time again. And then this offseason, who were people drafting on Underdog in best ball, thinking he was the number 1 receiver for the Giants? Isaiah Hodgins. It's every year, guys. And it's multiple players. It's not just one guy every year. There's 3 guys every year that fit this profile. And they very, 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 very rarely ever become anything, right? The Antonio Brown archetype is literally once every 10 years. Small school guy drafted in the 6th round, breaks out, and then becomes a perennial Pro Bowler. It's just so rare. Okay, you can want to say Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs came out early from Maryland. Okay, so that's not the same thing. That's
Right.
what we're
Tyreek
talking
Hill
about at all.
Diggs,
Okay,
Diggs was also a mega recruit, and Tyreek Hill also was a big-time Big 12 recruit.
No, yeah, you're
Yeah,
not
I
giving
think-
Tyreek Hill. You're not
Yeah,
giving me
yeah.
Stephon Diggs for
Yeah.
multiple reasons. They don't. This is not
Yeah.
what I am talking about.
Yeah.
And I had this aha moment when I went on this betting show, and I talked about how you got to take the Patriots over the Bills, certainly against the spread, but you need to think about taking the money line as well, because anytime I look up and I see a home dog getting 8.5 points, that's always the easiest bet. It's like, that's my first bet, and then I'm betting everything else, right? And we see the Jets did this, right? The Jets were at home, and
You gave us this one, Matt. The Chiefs-Jets, you were all over
right.
that big
The
line.
Jets
right
were at
down
home
the
against
wire.
the Chiefs. It didn't seem like they had a chance to even cover. Meanwhile, they won the game, right? And the 2 other hosts on this betting show dismissed me with a hand, with my Patriots pick. And you know what they called me? They called me a system bettor. They called me a system bettor, and apparently in the betting world, that is an egregious insult, right? You should feel aggrieved by that. That you would be called a system bettor. That means you lack sophistication, and you're just, basically running the lines through an algorithm that says, based on the algorithm, a home dog getting more than 7 points has the highest probability of covering, irrespective of what the game situation is, the team situations are, et cetera, et cetera. That's just a system play. And then so the podcast ends, and I have to look myself in the mirror and go, well, man, I'm going to be right about all my picks, but are they just system picks? I mean, I think I also picked the Eagles over the Dolphins. Why? Because the Dolphins hadn't beaten a team with a winning record yet. Jeez, that's pretty simple. Man, you really need to dig into the injury reports. You really need to get into what the coaches were saying if you really want to have a good take on a betting show, Matt. You're just a system person. You're a system analyst. And, so I went to bed questioning who I am. And I woke up the next morning realizing, guess what, guys? I'm a system guy. I'm a system guy. And I thought about all the dynasty trades I've ever done just based on the system. I don't care what he is. I don't care that he went to Liberty. I don't care that he's a great athlete. I don't care what the coaches say. I don't care. If the undrafted guy is going to flash big production, okay? And he's going to exceed all expectations, and he's going to go to the Colts, and he's going to put up 20 fantasy points, right? Because why Kendrick Bourne's out, right? And someone is gullible enough to send a 2nd rounder my way. I don't care about what his profile is. This is the one situation I would say, do not go to PlayerProfiler.com. Do not stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Just push the button. Trade him. Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.